Welcome, listeners. Step out of the light and come with me into the shadows. Every now and then, we stumble upon a case that feels less like a true crime documentary and more like a dark, dystopian thrill, a narrative that bleeds across decades. It is a story rooted in the grit of the 1990 seconds, built on twisted romance, secret identities, and an explosive live television standoff. Yet, its conclusion brings us face to face with the chilling, bleeding edge of modern technology, a vast, unblinking network of artificial intelligence that just might render the concept of a cold case entirely obsolete. This is the harrowing saga of Ziying and Rongzhi. They were known to the media as China's very own Bonnie and Clyde, but as you are about to discover, that romantic moniker does a grave injustice to the sheer, unadulterated terror they left in their wake. To understand the monsters, we must first look at the soil from which they grew with her husband. Born into the crushing poverty of Ziying City in 1964, Ziying drew a terribly short straw in life. He was the youngest of 7 children crammed into a suffocating, impoverished household. His father broke his back as a lonely cart driver, while his mother hawked tea on the dusty streets, desperately trying to scrape together enough coin to keep her children from starving. They lived a precarious, hand-to-mouth existence. Yet, adversity often breeds resilience. FA's older siblings were fiercely industrious, fighting tooth and nail to claw their way out of poverty, eventually securing highly coveted, stable government jobs. But Ziying was cut from a different, darker cloth. By the mid-1970s, he was the only child left in the crumbling school system, and his academic record was abysmal. He possessed absolutely no ambition for honest work. He was a slacker, a truant, a boy perfectly content to inherit his father's grueling cart, driving trade and drift through a mediocre life. But the universe is cruel, and in 1977, tragedy struck a fatal blow to the family's fragile foundation. FA's father was swallowed by the churning, muddy waters of the Yangtze River, caught in a vicious whirlpool and drowned. Only months later, his mother was involved in a catastrophic car accident, leaving her permanently paralyzed. At just 14 years old, Ziying wasn't tethered. His siblings had moved on. His father was a ghost, and his mother was confined to a bed, bereft of discipline, guidance, or a moral compass. The boy abandoned the classroom entirely and stepped into the welcoming embrace of the criminal underworld. The descent was rapid. By 1981, a teenage FA was sentenced to 8 years in a labor re-education camp for a violent cocktail of robbery, assault, and hooliganism. He served 3 years before being released, but the camp hadn't rehabilitated him. It had simply sharpened his edges. In 1985, he was thrown back into a concrete cell, slapped with a severe 10-year sentence for robbery and intentional injury. Again, the justice system blinked, releasing him early in 1989. Stepping out of the prison gates for the second time, FA attempted to wear the mask of a normal man. He tried his hand at entrepreneurship. In 1990, he married a woman named Maya, and a year later, they welcomed a baby girl into the world. But the ink of his past had stained him too deeply. In the alleys and smoky backrooms of Ziying, he wasn't a family man. He was known by a sinister street name, Pharaoh 7. He was a hardened gangster heavily entwined with the ruthless local triad syndicates. The illusion of domestic bliss quickly shattered. Less than 2 years after exchanging vows, his marriage collapsed. FA paid his ex-wife a settlement of 85,000 yuan, packed his bags, and walked away from his family. He was a violent, scarred, and nameless enforcer. And then in the year 1993, at a crowded, joyous wedding reception, the 28-year-old gangster locked eyes with an 18-year-old elementary school teacher. Her name was Rongzhi. On paper, the universe could not have forged two people more diametrically opposed. Where FA was lazy, uneducated, and radiated a palpable menace, Lao was delicate, highly intelligent, and refined. She had been raised in a comfortable, relatively wealthy household. She was the pride of her family. Hurst, cunning, soft features, and her sunny, sweet disposition made her the absolute talk of the town. She was a woman with endless, respectable suitors desperate to catch her eye. But Rongzhi harbored a dark, unspoken secret. Behind her pristine, ladylike exterior, a profound rot was taking root. She was drowning in the suffocating monotony of her own life. She had desperately wanted to attend a prestigious college, to carve out a brilliant, ambitious future, but her traditional family, specifically her brother, had pressured her into settling for the quiet, respectable life of an elementary school teacher. She had a good job, a safe life, a normal life, and she absolutely despised it. Before they even met at that wedding, Lao had heard the hushed, fearful whispers about Ziying, but instead of revulsion, she felt an intoxicating pull. In her deeply twisted mind, she didn't see a violent thug. She saw a romanticized outlaw. She saw Gujiang's very own Robin Hood, a man who lived by his own rules, who stole from the wealthy, who refused to bow to a boring, mundane society. She was desperate to feel alive, and Ziying was a live wire. That night at the wedding reception, the good girl made a choice. She climbed onto the back of the gangster's motorcycle, wrapped her arms around his waist, and rode away from everything she had ever known. The romance that blossomed between them was explosive, obsessive, and extraordinarily expensive. They began spending tens of thousands of yuan every single month on lavish dates, fine dining, and endless entertainment. The tab was picked up entirely by FA's illicit triad earnings. He had fully relapsed into his brutal, criminal ways, and Rongzhi loved every single second of it. She didn't just tolerate his violence, she fueled it. She resigned from her teaching position trading calcboards for the thrill of the hunt. She became his willing accomplice, helping him rob the innocent citizens of their town to fund their opulent lifestyle. The boredom that had plagued her youth was dead and buried. But the honeymoon phase came crashing down on a sweltering, humid summer evening in 1996. Ziying became embroiled in a vicious, bloody street dispute with members of a rival triad syndicate. In the chaos, Fa drove a harpoon into one of the opposing gang members. He knew instantly that he was a dead man walking. The rival bosses would undoubtedly place a massive, inescapable bounty on his head. Covered in sweat and panic, Fa ran to Law's family home and confessed what he had done. Law's parents and siblings, overhearing the frantic conversation, were paralyzed with horror. Their precious, perfect daughter was dating a murderous syndicate enforcer. But the true shock came moments later. Now Rongzhi looked at her horrified family, turned her back on them without a shred of hesitation, and fled into the night with Ziying. They left the city behind, abandoning their pasts to forge a terrifying new future. This was no longer a fairy tale of a bad boy and a good girl. This was the birth of an apex predatory unit. Criminal psychologists who have analyzed this case point to a specific, terrifying pathology within Rongzhi. They believe she was suffering from a severe case of hybristophilia, colloquially known as Bonnie and Clyde Syndrome. It is a dark, psychological paraphilia where an individual is not just attracted to, but actively, intensely aroused by committing criminal behavior and associating with dangerous felons. Do not mistake Rongzhi for a victim of circumstance. She was not a weak, gullible girl manipulated by an older man. She didn't abandon her life because she was blindly, foolishly in love. She did it because the adrenaline of the crime, the power of the cruelty, fundamentally excited her. Now completely cut off from the endless flow of triad cash, the fugitive couple found themselves desperate, hunted, and broke. They needed a revenue stream, and they needed it immediately. Together, they engineered a brilliantly sinister, highly lucrative extortion racket, a honey trap. They moved like ghosts, traveling across the vast expanse of China, jumping from city to city, constantly renting anonymous apartments under an endless rotation of fake names. Rongzhi assumed the alias Jin. She would slink into the seedy, dimly lit nightclubs and VIP karaoke bars of their new city. Utilizing her undeniable beauty and refined charm, she played the role of a deeply dissatisfied married woman, desperately seeking a discreet, passionate affair. She would cast her net, lock eyes with a wealthy, unsuspecting businessman, and invite him back to her rented apartment for a night of illicit fun. Enchanted by her delicate features, the marks almost always took the bait turn. They would follow her into the dark apartment, and the moment the heavy door clicked shut, the trap snapped. Ziying would emerge from the shadows, roaring with manufactured fury, playing the role of Jae-in's violently outraged husband. He would physically overpower the terrified businessman, pressing a blade to his throat. Then came the ultimatum. The terrified Mark could either pay a massive, exorbitant sum of hush money as compensation for trying to bed another man's wife, or Fa would publicly expose the affair, annihilating the businessman's reputation, his career, and his own marriage. Faced with public ruin or physical violence, the victims always paid. The scam was breathtakingly successful. They netted between 70 and 80,000 yuan from every single mark, the equivalent of over $10,000 a hit. It was a fortune in the 1990 seconds. It was the perfect crime, until they realized a glaring, fatal flaw. They were leaving a trail of living, breathing witnesses. Every single man they extorted knew exactly what Jin and her of island husband looked like. If the police ever connected the dots, if a victim ever found the courage to step forward and point a finger in a lineup, they would be staring down a firing squad. The couple held a dark council. They agreed that their operation required a vital, permanent adjustment. They could no longer leave witnesses alive. The extortion was about to mutate into serial murder. On July 28, 1996, the humid air of Nanchang hung heavy over the city. Now Rongzhi, working her shift at a vibrant club called the Philharmonic, set her sights on a 35-year-old man named Zhongqiu Iyy. As they drank, she noticed the heavy, expensive gold watch strapped to his wrist. She noted the thick gold rings on his fingers and the heavy gold chain resting against his collarbone. He was a walking vault. She seduced him, leading him out of the pulsing neon lights of the club and down a pitch-black, silent alleyway toward her rented apartment. Inside the apartment, Ziying was waiting in the suffocating silence. He watched through the crack of a door as the beautiful teacher led the wealthy businessman into the living room. Fa struck like a viper. He ambushed Zhang, throwing him to the ground. Together, the couple viciously stripped the terrified man of his clothing, tearing the gold watch, rings, and chain from his trembling body. Pressing the cold steel of a hunting knife against Zhang's throat, Fa demanded the businessman's home address. Panting, bleeding, and figuring his only chance of survival was absolute compliance, Zhang choked out the location of his apartment. Fa smiled. He thanked the man for his cooperation. And then, he produced a thin, incredibly sharp length of metal wire. He wrapped it tightly around Zhang's neck, crossed his wrists, and pulled. As the wire bit into the flesh, as the businessman thrashed and suffocated on the floor, Lao Rongzhi stood nearby and watched. Her eyes were wide, but not with horror. They were wide with the intoxicating electric thrill of the kill. Once Zhang's body went limp, the couple dragged him into the bathroom. They retrieved heavy blades and systematically, coldly butchered the human being, packing his severed remains into heavy, black plastic garbage bags. But the nightmare was far from over. Fi and Lao needed to ensure the address Zhang gave them was legitimate. They made a scouting trip to the victim's apartment block, identifying the correct door and cleanly severing the external phone lines. Later that same night, armed with the dead man's keys, they silently unlocked the door to his home and stepped inside. Sleeping peacefully in the dark bedrooms were Zhang's 28-year-old wife, Zhang Li, and their innocent, 3-year-old daughter, Zhang Ling Swang. Fa Zhang crept into the room and violently jolted them awake. Before the mother could even process the nightmare, Fa overpowered them, hog-tying both the woman and the terrified toddler with heavy rope. He left Lao Rongzhi to stand guard over the sobbing mother and child while he systematically ransacked the apartment, hunting for hidden cash and jewelry. But robbery wasn't enough. Fa Ziying wanted to inflict profound psychological torture. He walked back into the bedroom, carrying one of the black plastic garbage bags from their apartment. He opened it in front of the bound mother and child, forcing them to look upon the severed head of their husband and father. Their screams were muffled by the gags. Bored with the torture, Fa unbuckled his leather belt. He wrapped it around the neck of the young mother, strangling the life out of her. He then turned his cold eyes to the 3-year-old child, wrapping the same belt around her tiny throat, and pulled until the room fell dead silent. Standing amidst the slaughter of an entire family, high on the absolute rush of her first multiple homicide, Rongzhi, I let out a giddy giggle. She looked at F.A. and suggested they torch the apartment to cinder and ash, erasing any stray fingerprints they might have left behind. F.A. agreed. They doused the rooms in accelerant. In the early bruised hours of July 29th, the couple slipped out of the building as the flames began to roar, carrying 20,000 yuan, roughly $3,000, in stolen cash. Fire engines wailed through the streets of Nanchang, rushing to battle the inferno. When the brave firemen breached the smoking, charred ruins of the apartment, they stumbled upon the smoldering, burned bodies of the mother and her toddler. 2 days later, the horrific puzzle was completed. Local residents complained of a putrid, sickening odor radiating from a community dumpster miles away. Police opened the bins and found the 4 black bags containing the butchered remains of Zhongqiu Iyii. The Nanchang Public Security Bureau immediately launched a massive homicide investigation. Tracing the victim's final steps, detectives quickly discovered that Zhang was last seen walking out of the Philharmonic Club with a stunning, mysterious hostess known only as Jin. When police arrived at the club, they found that Jin had vanished. Working backward, pulling employment records and interviewing witnesses, detectives shattered the alias. On August 18, 1996, the authorities issued a nationwide wanted notice. The faces of the delicate school teacher, Rongzhi, and her scarred, triad boyfriend, Ziying, were blasted across the country. They were now the most hunted couple in China. For an entire year, they operated as ghosts. They moved silently through the sprawling provinces of eastern China, funding their survival by running their brutal adultery scam, leaving a trail of terrified, silent men in their wake. On October 10, 1997, the predator couple arrived in the bustling coastal city of Wenzhou. They needed a new mark. At a lavish KTV karaoke club, Rongzhi, wearing a new face and a new name, befriended a 22-year-old woman named Yang Shaikang. Lao's predatory eyes locked onto Liang's wrist. She was wearing a highly expensive authentic Omega watch. Assuming the young woman came from immense wealth, Lao manipulated her way into an invitation back to Liang's apartment. The moment they stepped through the door, the illusion of friendship evaporated. Ziying, who had trailed them, burst inside, pressing a heavy blade directly against Liang's throat. They tore the apartment apart, ripping open drawers and tearing apart cushions, hunting for hidden bundles of cash. But they found nothing. The expensive watch was a facade. Liang had virtually no liquid cash on hand. Furious and unsatisfied, F.A. pressed the blade harder against the weeping girl's flesh. He ordered her to pick up her phone and call the wealthiest person she knew, demanding they bring money to the apartment, or he would slice her throat open. Desperate to survive, Liang dialed the number of her boss, 29-year-old Yu Su-king. Putting on an award-winning performance, Liang pretended to be violently ill, begging her boss for help. Liu Su-king, an incredibly altruistic and deeply caring woman, dropped everything. She rushed across the city to the apartment, entirely unaware she was walking into an abattoir. The moment Liu stepped through the door, Ziying tackled her to the floor, binding her wrists and ankles with tight plastic cable ties. But the tragedy compounded. You two carried very little physical cash. The killers pivoted. While F.A. stood over the two bound, sobbing women, brandishing his knife, Rongzhi, I gathered their bank books and identification cards. She calmly walked out into the busy streets of Wenzhou, entering a local bank to drain their accounts. When Lao approached the teller to withdraw Yuing's entire life savings, the teller paused. She knew Yu personally, and she knew the woman standing in front of her was an imposter. The teller eyed Lao with deep suspicion. But Rongzhi, I was a master manipulator. She flashed a warm, disarming smile, assuring the teller that her dear-friend Liu was simply bedridden with a terrible fever, and she was just doing a favor by running her errands. The teller relented. Lao successfully emptied the account, stealing 25,750 yuan. She returned to the apartment and handed the cash to F.A. Having gotten exactly what they wanted, Fa looked down at the two bound women. Without a flicker of hesitation or remorse, he wrapped a cord around their necks and violently strangled them both to death. The couple casually packed their bags, stripped the corpses of their watches, phones and purses, and boarded a long-distance coach out of Wenzhou that very same afternoon. Hours later, the silence of the tomb-like apartment was broken by the shrill ringing of Yang's stolen cell phone, nestled deep in Rongzhi's pocket on the moving bus. Lao answered the phone. The voice on the other end was a man, asking for Liang. Playing her role to perfection, Lao adopted a sweet, casual tone. She told the caller that her friend Liang was currently traveling on a romantic getaway with her new boyfriend, that she had foolishly left her phone behind, and wouldn't be returning for quite some time. The line went dead quiet. The caller, a man named Li, felt his blood run cold. The lie was physically impossible. Li was Liang's boyfriend. The next day, terrified for her safety, Li sprinted to his girlfriend's apartment. He found the heavy front door dead-bolted from the inside. Driven by panic, he scaled the side of the building, forcing his way inside through a neighbor's adjoining balcony window. He stepped into a nightmare. Lying in the entryway, their flesh pale and their limbs bound tightly with plastic cable ties, were the bodies of his beloved girlfriend and her boss. Forensic teams swarmed the Wenzhou apartment. They dusted the scene and managed to pull a single, clear fingerprint from the clothing of one of the victims. They ran it through the national database. It was a perfect match for the wanted fugitive, Ziying. The manhunt intensified, but the couple remained untouchable. In September of 1998, they surfaced in the city of Changshu. The dynamic shifted slightly. Now Rongzhi, I lured a wealthy auto shop owner named Yu who were back to their leased apartment. But this time, Fa didn't wait to demand money. The second Liu who stepped over the threshold, Fa launched a savage, unprovoked attack, plunging a hunting knife deep into the man's chest. Bleeding heavily and fighting for his life, Hua was quickly subdued and securely bound to a chair. Fa ripped through his pockets, finding a meager 5,000 yuan and the keys to a luxury sports car. It wasn't enough. Standing over the bleeding man, Fa ordered him to phone his wife and demand she bring a massive ransom to the apartment immediately. When the terrified wife arrived, she was instantly dragged inside and tied up next to her bleeding husband. It was here that a strange, entirely uncharacteristic anomaly occurred. Liu Hua, bleeding and believing he was about to die, looked up at the scarred gangster. He didn't beg for his own life. "Do whatever you want with me," the bleeding man cried, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his bound wife. "But please, let her live. I beg you, let her live." Lao Rongzhi, standing in the corner, scoffed. She demanded that Fa slaughter them both and be done with it. But Fa Ziying paused. The hardened triad enforcer, a man who had strangled a 3-year-old child to death with his own belt, was suddenly, profoundly moved by the profound, selfless love the bleeding man displayed for his wife. Fa lowered his blade. He extorted 70,000 yuan from the couple, stole the keys to the expensive sports car, and inexplicably decided to grant them mercy. Fa and Lao walked out of the apartment, leaving the couple bound, bleeding but alive, for their neighbors to eventually discover. When the traumatized couple later spoke to detectives, they shared a terrifying detail about their captors. During the entire horrifying ordeal, Fa and Lao barely exchanged a single spoken word. They moved with terrifying precision, communicating entirely through intense eye contact, anticipating each other's needs and thoughts as if they shared a single, twisted telepathic brain. The anomaly of mercy in Changshu would never be repeated. The climax of their horrific saga was fast approaching. On June 21st, 1999, after another year of moving like phantoms across the vast Chinese landscape, the couple arrived in the eastern metropolis of Hefei. They were incredibly cautious. They checked into two entirely separate hotels within the same district to avoid raising suspicion as a couple. They also leased a quiet apartment in the Shuangquan district. This apartment was not meant for living. It was explicitly chosen to be a slaughterhouse. On July 15th, Lao Rongzhi was working her routine. She was dressed as a provocative bargirl in a pulsing, neon-lit dance hall. Her eyes scanned the room and locked onto Yin Jahonha. He was a 35-year-old general manager of a large electronic company. He was loud, boisterous, constantly buying rounds of drinks for the entire bar, and peeling off bills to lend money to his friends. Lao saw a walking bank account. She smiled, bought him a drink, and invited him back to the Shuangkuan apartment. Yin, expecting a night of passion, followed her inside. But the moment the door closed, Ziying materialized from the shadows. He violently overpowered the executive. But they didn't just tie him to a chair. He dragged the terrified, bruised manager across the floor and physically forced him into a heavy, welded iron dog cage that they had specifically purchased and placed in the center of the living room. He snapped a heavy padlock onto the iron door. Standing over the cage, Fa delivered his terrifying ultimatum. Yin was to write a ransom note to his wealthy wife, demanding an astronomical sum of 300,000 yuan for his safe return. If he refused, he would die in the cage. But Yin Jahonha was a remarkably brave, stubborn man. He gripped the iron bars and flatly refused to write the note. He simply did not believe that this thug had the stomach to actually murder him. He thought it was a bluff. Ziying was enraged by the defiance. He screamed at the caged man, kicking the iron bars, but Yin remained steadfast in his refusal. Sensing that her lover was losing control of the situation, Rongzhi stepped forward with a chilling, demonic suggestion. She whispered that they needed to prove to the man in the cage exactly what they were capable of. They needed a demonstration. Lao picked up the telephone and casually flipped through a local directory. She called a 33-year-old carpenter and repairman named Lu Zongming, who lived just a few streets over. She used her sweet, innocent voice, asking if he could urgently come over to fix a broken window frame. Lu Zongming, a hard-working, blue-collar man just trying to earn a living to feed his wife and 3 children, grabbed his toolbox and walked to the apartment. The moment the innocent repairman stepped over the threshold, Ziying ambushed him. Fa dragged the screaming, confused carpenter down the hallway and violently threw him into the cramped bathroom. Fa raised a heavy, steel-headed axe. He brought it down, again, and again, and again. He struck the innocent man 20 times. In the living room, locked inside his iron cage, Yin Jahonha sat frozen in absolute horror. He could hear the heavy, wet thuds of the axe biting through bone and flesh coming through the thin drywall. He could hear the repairman's desperate, agonizing screams for his life until they were replaced by a sickening, gurgling silence. The bathroom door slowly creaked open. Ziying, drenched in crimson blood, casually walked back into the living room. In his hands, he carried the severed head of the repairman. He walked over to the dog cage and tossed the head onto the floorboards, right in front of Yin Jahonha's face. The demonstration was over. Not a single word was needed. As Fa stood there breathing heavily, Rongzhi walked into the bathroom. She grabbed the butchered remains of the repairman and unceremoniously stuffed them into a massive chest freezer she had purchased specifically to store human bodies in the summer heat. Trembling, broken, and weeping, Yin Jahonha grabbed a pen. He wrote the ransom note exactly as instructed, begging his wife to gather the 300,000 yuan. Leaning over the cage, Rongzhi smiled coldly. She instructed Yin to end the desperate letter with a very specific, chilling sentence. "I'll be dead for a penny less." The trap was set. Ziying took the note and arranged a rendezvous with Yin's wife to collect the massive payout. But the plan immediately fractured. Due to a chaotic misunderstanding of the drop location, the wife completely missed the initial exchange. Furious, Fa pivoted. He contacted the wife again, demanding she meet him at her own home to hand over the cash. Fa arrived at the upscale apartment complex. Before knocking, he meticulously cut the external phone lines. He stepped inside. But this time, he wasn't just holding a knife. He was wielding a loaded, illegal firearm. Fa sat in the living room, arrogantly boasting about his violent history, completely unaware that his hubris was about to be his downfall. While Fa ranted, the terrified wife slowly, carefully reached into her pocket. She managed to blindly manipulate the buttons on a hidden two-way pager. She sent a frantic, desperate SOS signal to her company's general manager, begging him to call the police immediately. Knowing she had to buy time, the incredibly composed wife looked Tiffei in the eye and calmly explained that she didn't have the full 300,000 yuan in the house. She asked if she could simply run next door to borrow the remaining funds from her wealthy friends. Fa, arrogant and blinded by greed, agreed. The moment the door closed behind her, the wife sprinted for her life. Within minutes, the wailing sirens of the Hafepel East apartment shattered the air. Dozens of heavily armed tactical officers surrounded the apartment complex. Elite snipers scrambled onto the rooftops of adjacent buildings, training their crossers on the windows, completely sealing Ziying inside. By an astonishing stroke of coincidence, a local television news crew happened to be riding along with one of the responding tactical units that very day. They were filming an episode of Police Window, a live-action, reality-style documentary show similar to the American program Cops. The cameramen rushed into the building alongside the heavily armed officers. They crouched behind a bed in the hallway, their camo lenses focused directly on the barricaded door. They captured the ensuing, terrifying standoff on live, national television. Trapped like a rat, Ziying completely unraveled. He paced the apartment, screaming incoherent, philosophical rants through the door at the hostage negotiators. He aggressively debated the existential value of human life with the police, all while bizarrely demanding they order him a hot meal. At one point, Fa noticed the red recording light of the television camera peeking out from the hallway. He stepped into the doorway, pointing his weapon directly at the lens. "Hey you there, holding the camera," Fa shouted, his voice echoing on live television. "You don't look like a tough guy. Do you find recording this funny? You might lose your life in a second." After 3 grueling hours of failed negotiations, the tactical commander gave the order. Officers smashed the windows and pumped the barricaded apartment full of blinding, choking tear gas. Coughing and enraged, Ziying opened fire. The hallway erupted in deafening gunfire. The police unleashed a barrage of bullets through the door. A single round tore through Ziying's right thigh, shattering the bone and dropping him to the floor. Tactical officers stormed the room, pinning the bleeding, thrashing gangster to the ground. At 11:00 p.m., the terrifying Pharaoh 7 was finally captured alive. He was dragged into a concrete interrogation room. Detectives demanded to know the location of the apartment where they were holding the hostage, Yinjahanha, and more importantly, they demanded the name and location of his female accomplice. Ziying, bleeding unshackled, sneered at them. He flatly, stubbornly refused to give up a single detail. When pressed about the beautiful woman witnesses had seen him with her husband, Fa looked the detectives in the eye and swore he had absolutely no idea who they were talking about. He claimed he worked alone. He was a monster, but he was undeniably, fiercely loyal to Rongzhi. His silence bought her the most precious commodity of all, time. Days bled by. On July 27th, the Hefei police received a frantic call from a landlord in the Shuangquan district. The landlord had gone to collect rent on a leased apartment and noticed a foul smell. Detectives breached the apartment. In the center of the living room stood the empty, rusted iron dog cage, and in the corner hummed a heavy chest freezer. When they opened the lid, they found the frozen, tangled remains of the kidnapped executive, Yin Jiahanha, and the innocent repairman, Lu Zongming. In a horrifying twist of fate, the landlord would later realize that if he had answered his phone on the morning of June 21st, Rongzhi, I would have summoned him to fix the window. It would have been his head tossed in front of the cage. But where was Rongzhi? She was gone, but she had left a message, resting on a small table in the apartment. Written in her elegant, looping handwriting was a single note. It read, "Honey, I'll wait for you at home. I love you." Forensic analysis revealed a dark truth. Yin Jiahanha had not died while Ziying was in the apartment. He had been murdered after Fa was arrested. Realizing her lover wasn't coming back, Rongzhi had callously executed the man in the cage before packing her bags and vanishing into the wind. When detectives confronted Ziying in his cell, throwing crime scene photos of Yin's body onto the steel table. Fa continued his desperate charade to protect the woman he loved. He claimed he had killed the hostage himself before leaving for the ransom drop. When the autopsy proved that was medically impossible, Fa spun a ridiculous, cartoonish lie. He claimed he had tied a heavy rope around Yin's neck and attached it to a complex, timed mechanical device that was set to strangle the man hours after he left. Of course, no such device existed. Fa Ziying was simply absorbing all of hers to keep the noose from her neck. Finally, exhausted by the interrogation, Fa simply smirked and said, "I ended his life." Whenever the prosecutor says I did. During his highly publicized trial, Fa arrogantly attempted to invoke his twisted Robin Hood defense. He claimed he was a righteous outlaw, a man who only slaughtered the corrupt and the rich to redistribute wealth to the poor. The prosecution decimated his pathetic defense. They pointed to the smoldering remains of a 3-year-old toddler. They pointed to the severed head of Lu Zongming, a deeply impoverished, working-class repairman who was slaughtered simply to make a point. They noted that while his other victims spent money lavishly, none of them were billionaires. They were simply men caught in a spider's web. In November 1999, the gavel fell. Fa Ziying was found guilty of 7 counts of brutal, premeditated murder. Less than a month later, on the freezing morning of December 28th, the 35-year-old gangster was dragged into an open courtyard. He was publicly strapped to a heavy wooden chair. A single gunshot echoed off the concrete walls. A bullet tore through the back of his head. Fa Ziying was dead. One half of the nightmare had been extinguished. But the other half, the beautiful, intelligent, remorseless mastermind, had vanished without a trace. Despite being elevated to the top of China's most wanted fugitives list, despite her face being broadcast on every television screen and plastered on every train station wall, Rongzhi evaporated. Using the massive head start Fa had gifted her, she fled her fate. She traveled under the radar, eventually making her way to a hidden safe house in the sprawling metropolis of Chongqing, the home she had cryptically referred to in her farewell note. She lived in absolute isolation, waiting for a man who would never return. It wasn't until January of 2000, watching a flickering television set in a cramped room, that she saw the news broadcast detailing Fa Ziying's execution. Knowing she was truly alone, she packed her bags and fled Chongqing, migrating to the bustling, coastal city of Ziying. For the next 2 decades, she became a chameleon. She lived a nomadic, paranoid existence, drifting through an endless sea of cheap hostels, decaying hotels, and anonymous guest houses. She worked cash-in-hand jobs, pouring drinks in dimly lit pubs, taking odd jobs, and occasionally selling her body to survive. But she didn't just hide. She transformed. She funneled every spare yuan she earned into radical plastic surgery. She had her facial structure surgically altered, softening the delicate features that adorned the wanted posters. She adopted dozens of flawlessly crafted fake identities. She trained her vocal cords, mastering different regional dialects and accents to mask her origins. She became someone else entirely. As the years bled into decades, the relentless march of time did its work. Her face faded from the billboards, replaced by newer, fresher monsters. Her name dissolved from the public consciousness. The trail didn't just go cold, it froze solid. Slowly, the paranoia began to lift. She began to believe she had actually done the impossible. She believed she had outrun her past. By the year 2016, she had settled comfortably in Ziying. She was working as a popular barmaid in a local pub, using the English name Sherry. Co-workers and patrons adored her. They described her as a fun, deeply empathetic, and joyful woman who possessed a magical ability to make everyone in the room feel completely at ease. In 2017, she transitioned to a legitimate, respectable job, working as a charismatic saleswoman at a high-end car dealership. She fell in love again, entering into a serious, loving relationship with a local businessman. Her new partner, her friends, and her community believed she was a wonderful, normal woman. They had absolutely no idea that they were breaking bread with a serial killer. But while Rongzhi had been hiding in the shadows, the world outside had been changing and terrifying. exponential rate. In 2019, the People's Republic of China was preparing to celebrate its 70th anniversary. To mark the monumental occasion, the government sought to project an image of absolute order and security. They wanted to clean house, and that meant sweeping the board of long-standing wanted fugitives. They launched a massive, unprecedented technological initiative code named Operation Cloud Sword. The authorities didn't just rely on standard detective work, they unleashed the future. The government installed hundreds of millions of ultra-high-definition surveillance cameras across the entire country, embedding them in every street corner, shopping mall, and transit hub. But these weren't just cameras. They were the physical eyes of a massive, terrifyingly sophisticated artificial intelligence network. This facial recognition system was capable of scanning a crowd, analyzing biometric data, and positively identifying any one of the nation's 4 billion residents in less than 3 seconds. It was the largest, most pervasive surveillance apparatus in human history. For the average citizen, Operation Cloud Sword was a deeply controversial, double-edged sword, representing the ultimate death of privacy and the rise of a watchful Big Brother. But for the monsters hiding in plain sight, it was the sound of a closing trap. Rongzhi, I had heard the rumors of the new cameras, but cloaked in the arrogance of a woman who had successfully evaded the law for 23 years, she grossly underestimated the terrifying power of the machine. She had stopped looking over her shoulder when her wealthy boyfriend offered her a comfortable, highly visible part-time job selling luxury watches at his brightly lit store in the Dongbi Ikeidanji Plaza. She eagerly accepted. She stood in the open, smiling at customers, completely unaware of the digital eye staring down at her from the ceiling. On November 27, 2019, deep within a server farm, a silent alarm tripped. The AI algorithm had scanned the face of the friendly, flirty watch vendor. It cross-referenced the biometric structure of her cheekbones, the spacing of her eyes, the geometry of her jaw against decades-old wanted posters. To the naked human eye, the older, surgically altered woman bore only a passing, vague resemblance to the teenage killer of 1996, but the cold, unfeeling mathematics of the machine saw through the surgical scars in the makeup. The AI reported a staggering 97.33% biometric match. The ghost had been found. The following day, plainclothes detectives quietly descended upon the bustling shopping mall. They approached the watch stall and politely asked the woman to accompany them to the station for routine questioning. She didn't panic. She smiled her practiced smile, claiming her name was Hongyi Jiaoi, insisting there had to be some sort of comical misunderstanding. But at the station, the facade was finally shattered. Detectives swabbed the inside of her cheek. Hours later, the DNA results returned. The science was absolute. Hongyi Jiaoi was a fiction. The woman sitting in the interrogation chair was Rongzhi. The arrest sent shockwaves across the nation. Her devoted boyfriend, utterly blinded by love, publicly pledged to liquidate his entire fortune to fund her legal defense, swearing to the press that the police had framed an innocent woman. But in the sterile light of the courtroom, faced with the undeniable DNA evidence, Rongzhi, I finally confessed her true identity. She admitted she was the Bonnie to Ziying's Clyde, but she immediately launched into a desperate, theatrical performance. She wept uncontrollably, insisting she was a tragic victim of circumstance. She painted a picture of absolute terror, claiming that the monstrous Ziying had held her hostage, threatening to slaughter her entire family if she didn't comply with his dark demands. I didn't want to kill anyone, she wailed to the stony-faced judges, tears streaming down her surgically altered face. I just wanted to live. Believe me, my screams were often louder than the victims. She claimed she had desperately wanted to escape, but was too young, too afraid, and didn't know who to trust. But the prosecutors were not moved by the tears. They unleashed an avalanche of irrefutable evidence. Decades-old phone records, recovered CCTV footage, timeline discrepancies, contradictory statements, and brutal forensic realities painted a terrifying picture. The evidence proved that Rongzhi, I was not a cowering hostage. She was the architect. She was the one who stocked the neon clubs and selected the wealthy marks. She was the one who actively manipulated the victims back to the slaughterhouse. She was the one who drained the bank accounts, And, most damningly, forensics suggested she was the one who had physically taken the life of Yinja Honha in the dog cage purely out of malice when she realized Defe wasn't returning. The psychological profile, rooted deeply in the mechanics of hybristophilia, destroyed her defense. She hadn't been forced. She had been infatuated by the power of the violence. She saw Fei as the ultimate, dominant alpha male, and she wanted to live in his dark shadow. When the truth was laid bare, the tears dried up. All she could offer were hollow apologies to the ghosts of her past. She looked across the courtroom at Zhu Dehong, the grieving widow of the innocent repairman, Lu Zhongming. Zhu had been left entirely destitute, forced to single-handedly raise 3 children in care for an extended family on a razor-thin margin. The trauma had been so severe that the repairman's own mother had literally cried until the blood vessels in her eyes ruptured, leaving her permanently blind. Lao offered to start an online crowdfunding campaign for the families, as if digital donations could wash the blood from her hands. The victims' families watched her in disgusted silence. On September 9th, 2021, the court delivered its verdict. Lao Rongzhi was found guilty of serial homicide, kidnapping, and robbery. She was handed the exact same fate as the lover she had followed into the dark. The Supreme People's Court swiftly rejected her desperate appeals. On a cold day in 2023, she was permitted to see her family one last time, the same family she hadn't spoken a word to in 23 years. Trembling behind the glass, stripped of Hurch, and her fake identities, she wept genuine tears of regret. She begged them to repay a trivial 200 yuan debt she owed to her former boyfriend's mother, and she prayed that no future generation of the Lao family would ever inherit her darkness. On Monday, December 18, 2023, the 49-year-old woman was strapped to a gurney. A lethal injection flowed into her veins, stopping her heart. The saga of China's Bonnie and Clyde was finally, violently concluded. As we reflect on this descent into madness, we are left to grapple with the disturbing reality of human nature and the chilling promise of our technological future. Was there a microscopic grain of truth in her defense? Was she, on some level, afraid of the monster she had unleashed? Perhaps, but adults make choices. And she chose to hunt. She chose to kill. And she chose to hide for over 2 decades. And what of the machine that caught her? The unblinking, artificial eyes that scan the crowds from the ceiling. Is it a dystopian nightmare, the ultimate death of our civil liberties and privacy? Or is it a necessary evolution? A technological shield ensuring that no monster can ever truly vanish into the crowd again? It is a profound, terrifying question that every society on Earth will soon be forced to answer. But one thing is absolutely certain. With the rise of the algorithm, the camera, and the silicon brain, the era of the perfect, unsolved crime is rapidly bleeding away into the past. Stay safe out there in the dark, listeners. And remember, something is always watching. Welcome, listeners. Step into the dark with me. There is a comforting illusion we all cling to as we navigate our daily lives. We believe that there are certain sanctuaries immune to the horrors of the outside world. We look back at the nostalgia of our childhoods, believing those memories are wrapped in protective glass. We log onto the internet from the safety of our bedrooms, convinced the digital divide acts as an impenetrable shield. And, above all else, we turn the deadbolts on our front doors at night, absolutely certain that the wolves of our homes keep the monsters at bay. But illusions are fragile things. In today's broadcast, we are going to peel back the layers of that false security. We are going to examine 3 separate nightmares. 3 stories that prove the most terrifying threats don't lurk in the dark alleys or the deep woods. They hide in the glowing screens of our youth. They hunt in the endless scroll of our social media feeds. And sometimes they are already breathing the air inside your locked house. Our first descent takes us back to a simpler time. A time of neon carpets, the heavy scent of ozone and cheap pizza, and the cacophony of synthesized 8-bit music. For those of us who grew up in the 1980s and 90s, video games were the ultimate escape. While some enjoyed the comfort of a hung console, the true pioneers of the era spent their weekends in the dim, glowing caverns of the local arcade. You remember the atmosphere, the heavy clinking of quarters, the hypnotic flashing lights of Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and Double Dragon. It was an environment of pure, unadulterated joy, a safe haven for the youth. But imagine for a moment that you are standing in one of those dark, carpeted arcades in the mid-1980 seconds. You are staring into the bright, convex glass of a heavy CRT monitor. You approach a rather obscure, seemingly innocent sports cabinet, the 1985 release of Bally Senti Mini Golf. You reach into your pocket, your fingers brushing against cold metal coins. You look up at the screen as it cycles through its standard attract mode. It flashes the vibrant title screen. It shows a quick snippet of pixelated gameplay. It displays the high score leaderboard. And then, without warning, the screen cuts. It doesn't show a high score. It doesn't show a cartoon mascot. Almost like a digital jump scare, the screen abruptly displays a jagged, deeply unsettling, digitized photograph of a real human face. Beneath the haunting, low-resolution eyes of a young boy, a word is plastered in block text, missing. This was not a creepypasta. This was not a piece of modern analog horror. This was a chilling, absolute reality. In the 1980 seconds, the United States was gripped by a terrifying wave of missing children cases. Desperate to find new ways to broadcast the faces of the vanished, authorities and private companies turned to milk cartons and public service announcements. But Senti Technologies, the developers behind Bally Senti Mini Golf, decided to try something entirely unprecedented. They integrated the faces of missing children directly into the code of their arcade machines. The two most prominent faces etched into the phosphor glow of the mini golf cabinets belonged to two young boys, Tash and Merriman and Stephen Philip Curtis. Because of the severe technological limitations of 1985, the photographs had to be heavily digitized. The resulting images possessed a deeply disturbing, uncanny valley quality. The faces were comprised of jagged pixels, their features flattened and distorted by the harsh, contrasting colors of the arcade monitor. The sheer, jarring unexpected of seeing a real, missing child's face pop up between rounds of animated mini golf was enough to burn these phantom images into the developing brains of thousands of children. After all, the vast majority of the people staring into these screens were kids themselves, suddenly confronted with the terrifying reality that children their own age were being snatched away into the dark. For decades, the fates of the faces trapped in the arcade machines remained a lingering, haunting question for those who remembered them. It wasn't until years later, deep within the forums of the website Atari Age, that dedicated internet sleuths began to unravel the mystery. A user going by the moniker Thunderfist recalled the trauma of seeing the arcade cabinet at a local gas station. Driven by a morbid curiosity, he downloaded a digital emulator of the mini-golf game, extracted the pixelated images, and began digging through public records. The fate of the first boy, Tash Allen Merriman, offered a rare glimmer of hope. Records from the Beaver County Times confirmed that Tash had been the victim of a family abduction. On July 12, 1985, he was located safe and sound in Georgia, and his mother was arrested for the kidnapping. But as Thunderfist scoured the archives for the second boy, the trail went ice cold. There was absolutely no verifiable information online regarding Stephen Philip Curtis. Other forum users frantically searched, eventually finding a man named Stephen P. Curtis living near Hawke's Bay, the exact location the arcade poster claimed the boy had last been seen. But the name is incredibly common. No official connection could be made. To this day, the whereabouts, the well-being, and the ultimate fate of Stephen Philip Curtis remain entirely inconclusive. He is a ghost, forever trapped in a 1985 digital loop. And Tash and Stephen were not alone. As collectors have dug deeper into the code of old Bally Senti cabinets, they have unearthed a horrifying gallery of digital ghosts. Other grainy, pixelated faces began to surface. Melinda Marie Smith, April Rosie Yates, Daniel Godfrey Owens, Charles Brandon Morris, and likely countless others whose names have been lost to failing hard drives and rotting circuit boards. Of all the haunting faces flashed across those arcade screens, Tash Merriman remains the only one officially confirmed to have been found. The integration of these photos was a noble, yet deeply unsettling experiment by Senti Technologies. Modern archivists and retro gaming channels have even uncovered a hidden dips which menu within the mini golf game's code. Arcade owners could access a secret screen labeled Display Gids. From there, They could manually toggle whether a child's face would appear, and chillingly, they could switch a toggle to mark a specific child as located. To our knowledge, that located switch was only ever flipped for Tash. Today, these heavy wooden cabinets sit collecting dust in private collections, retro bars, and vintage arcades. And buried deep within their aging silicon code hide the relics of a failed experiment. They are the only known photographs of lost children forever immortalized in a video game. Their faces frozen in a pixelated purgatory. Their true stories forever untold. We leave the nostalgic glow of the 1980s seconds behind and step into the crushing, hyper-connected reality of the modern era. Depending on the lens through which you view it, social media is either the greatest blessing of the 21st century, or its most devastating curse. The majority of us use it to bridge vast distances, to share fleeting moments of joy, or simply to numb our minds and kill a few idle minutes. But the internet is a vast, unregulated wilderness, and not everyone uses it to connect. For the deeply lonely, it is a cold, hollow comfort. For the terminally online, it is a suffocating addiction. And for the most depraved predators among us, it is a target-rich hunting ground. In the span of just a short months in the year 2017, a terrifying epidemic swept through the prefectures in and around Tokyo, Japan. 8 young women, ranging in age from 15 to 26, and 1 young man, completely vanished from the face of the earth. They disappeared without a trace, leaving behind panicked families and empty bedrooms. But detectives quickly discovered a singular, chilling thread connecting every single one of the vanished. In the days and hours before they disappeared, they had all been engaged in deep, private conversations with a highly mysterious Twitter account. An account operating under the ominous handle, Hanging Pro. The man behind the keyboard was Takurio Shiraishi. To his neighbors, his acquaintances, and his family, Takurio was the picture of a quiet, docile, and perfectly polite young Japanese man. He bowed at the right times, he spoke with a soft cadence, and he never courted trouble. But the mask he wore in public was a flawless fabrication. Beneath the polite veneer, Takurio was a hollow, empty shell of a human being. He was a creature fundamentally incapable of experiencing empathy. He went through the motions of a normal life. He maintained a small circle of friends. He applied himself at school. He played sports. Yet, nothing in the world truly elicited a spark of interest within him. Nothing, except for one deeply morbid fascination. From an alarmingly young age, Takurio harbored a dark, consuming obsession with ropes. It was not a passing phase. During his childhood, his sister had once unexpectedly opened his bedroom door, only to be met with a horrifying sight. Takurio and a young friend were deeply engaged in the choking game. They had fashioned makeshift nooses and wrapped them tightly around each other's necks, violently tugging until their faces turned a bruised, suffocating shade of blue. It was a sick thrill that he nurtured and carried with him into the dark corridors of adulthood. After graduating from high school as a remarkably average student, Takurio chose to abandon further education. Instead, he packed his bags and vanished into the neon-drenched labyrinth of Tokyo. He gravitated toward Shinjuku's Kabukicho district, a seedy, pulsating entertainment hub notorious for its heavy red light, activity, and illicit shadows. He found employment as a scout. The job description was simple, yet predatory. Stand on the crowded streets, single out the most attractive, vulnerable young women passing by daily, and use immense charm to manipulate them into the underground world of escorting. It was a role that demanded supreme confidence and social grace. There was just one glaring issue. Takurio was absolutely terrified of women. The mere physical presence of a woman caused him to sweat profusely. His throat would constrict, and his words would devolve into a pathetic stutter. Unable to approach women face to face on the neon streets, Takurio adapted. He found a digital workaround. He retreated into the shadows and began scouring social media platforms. He specifically targeted beautiful, unemployed, and financially desperate women, flooding their inboxes with promises of vast wealth if they transitioned into night work. Behind the safety of a screen, his stutter vanished. His manipulation was flawless. The digital strategy proved horrifically effective. Yet, even among the hardened, morally bankrupt scouts operating in Kabukicho, Takurio earned a disturbing reputation. They didn't call him by his name. They dubbed him the creepy scout. It wasn't just his awkward demeanor that earned him the title. It was his eyes. Those who had the misfortune of speaking with him face to face noted something deeply wrong with his gaze. Whenever you looked directly into Takario's eyes, there was nothing looking back. It was a vacant, lifeless, bottomless stare, a void where a human soul should have been. And the Kabukicho underground soon learned that his dead eyes were the least of his terrifying traits. Whispers began to circulate. Leaked chat histories confirmed that Takario wasn't just targeting desperate adults. He was actively attempting to lure vulnerable, underage high school girls into the escort industry. The community turned on him. Anonymous users began plastering his photograph across Japanese message boards, accompanied by a stark warning. Watch out for this guy. The digital vigilante campaign eventually caught the eye of the authorities. Takario was arrested, dragged into court, and slapped with a 14-month suspended sentence in early 2017. Now officially a disgraced, jobless pariah, Takario fled the glaring lights of Tokyo. He relocated to the much quieter, neighboring city of Zoma. There, he rented a squalid, suffocatingly small, one-room apartment for a mere $250 a month. He was broke. He was isolated. He was entirely loveless. But rather than attempt to rebuild his life, he retreated further into the digital abyss. He spent every waking hour illuminated by the cold glow of his monitor, scouting for young women. But this time, he wasn't looking for escorts. He was looking for prey. Takario spun a massive web of deceit, creating a myriad of burner Twitter accounts, including the infamous Hanging Pro. He weaponized the platform's search algorithms, utilizing highly specific hashtags to fish for the most desperate, downtrodden, and suicidal users in Japan. His Twitter biography was a masterclass in predatory manipulation. It read, "I want to help people who are really in pain. Please DM me anytime." He adopted whatever persona his victims needed him to be. Sometimes he played the role of a morbid guru, possessing the dark knowledge to help others in their pain seamlessly. Other times he played the sympathetic mirror, a miserable, broken man begging for a companion to walk into the dark alongside him. His initial, twisted goal was purely parasitic. Because he was utterly incapable of wooing a woman in the real world, he decided to play the game of love on what he considered easy mode. He wanted to find a vulnerable sugar mama, a broken woman he could easily manipulate into providing him with both carnal satisfaction and financial stability. His first bite came from a 21-year-old woman named Miss Kuki Miura. She was a company employee for Matsui, drowning in her own profound unhappiness. After exchanging hundreds of messages, Takario convinced Mizukuki to meet him in person. They met several times, bonding over their shared darkness. Playing the ultimate manipulator, Takario offered her a sanctuary. He told her she could move into his Zama apartment, provided she pay him a massive 500,000 yen down payment to cover the rent. Blinded by her vulnerability, she accepted. In August of 2017, she moved her life into the tiny room. For a fleeting moment, the cohabitation was peaceful. But then, the real world intruded. Miss Kuki began communicating with another young man, a friend named Shogunashi Nakanashi. She was beginning to pull away from Takario's toxic orbit. And then, just as quickly as she had arrived, Ms. Kuki Miura vanished. Her fun went dead. Her social media went dark. On the exact same evening that Ms. Kuki sent her final, unread text message to the outside world, a chilling, anonymous post appeared on the infamous Japanese message board, Tokunel. The post read urgent, how to get rid of 50